I've been playing role-playing games for a long time, ever since a friend of mine introduced me to Ultima 7 when I was around 10. Countless hours of my life have been well spent playing games like Planescape Torment, Baldur's Gate, and Icewind Dale. I even managed to fuck up my first long-term relationship with a less than healthy dose of Neverwinter Nights. In my early teens, I was most definitely a Black Isle Studios fanboy. I never got into the whole Japanese RPG scene, however. There's just something about closeted yet flaming homosexuals swinging around massive phallic symbols and grunting suggestively. Don't get me wrong, I have absolutely nothing against homosexuals. I just want them to be honest about their attraction to huge, shiny swords. The biggest difference between Western RPGs and JRPGs, in my opinion, is where fantasy fits into the formula. With Japanese RPGs, the fantasy is everywhere. You have supernatural characters fighting supernatural enemies in a supernatural setting using supernatural powers. It's just way too disconnected from reality for me to make an emotional connection with my character and want to progress the story. I just fail to see where adversity fits into the equation. In Western RPGs, on the other hand, you have normal, realistic characters caught in supernatural situations fighting overwhelming supernatural enemies. I can very easily put myself in their shoes and form a real connection with my character, sharing their sense of daunting despondency. The fantasy comes in the setting and the plot, not in the character himself. Well, except in the form of magic, but even that has its limits. The popularity of the AD&D licensed games made by Black Isle Studios and later BioWare has only been matched by the immense popularity of Bethesda's Elder Scrolls series. Now, I've never played Arena or Daggerfall, but I cannot begin to imagine how many theories of relativity I could have posited with the time I've spent on Morrowind, Oblivion, and now Skyrim. I never even made it through the main plots of Morrowind or Oblivion, despite spending way more time with those games than I have with Skyrim, but I've still managed to become the leader of the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood, as well as defeating Alduin, the last dragon in the game. Even though the world is much bigger and there are way more things to see in Skyrim, the story just feels smaller somehow. But my main complaint with the series, and incidentally what makes Morrowind my favorite Elder Scrolls game to date, is fantasy. If you compare the games side by side, ignoring the differences that 9 years of graphics evolution have made, there's one vital element that will make Morrowind stand out: the alien look of the setting and creatures. They are what made Morrowind much more interesting and engaging than Oblivion, and especially more so than Skyrim. Morrowind had alien-looking flora, unique architecture, and some really weird-looking wildlife. And what made the game even more interesting was that each area had its own weird-looking flora and unique architecture. Fast forward to Oblivion and you have pretty standard-looking medieval architecture, flora that you could see just by looking out your window. The most interesting parts of Oblivion, setting-wise, are the Oblivion gates, but I didn't particularly like those as I'm not a big horror fan. I'm kind of a sissy myself, to be honest. Fast forward to today and we have Skyrim. Most elements of fantasy in the setting and wildlife have been eradicated by this point. Sure, we have giants who are essentially overgrown humans. We have the Draugur, who are reanimated corpses of humans. We have dragons, who are known in the mythology of every single culture known to man. And on the wildlife side, we have very normal bears, very normal wolves, a little bit less normal saber-toothed cats, mammoths, and those fat walrus-looking things. The trolls are the most alien of all the monsters, I guess, but their presence has kind of become a prerequisite for any Western RPG these days. The setting of Skyrim is also very normal. It's absolutely beautiful, don't get me wrong, but it looks like Scandinavian nature to me, nothing alien about it. The architecture as well strikes me as boringly familiar. Perhaps a part of the reason why Skyrim feels smaller to me is that I don't find myself interested in exploring that much. I go accept a mission, go complete it, return it, and accept a new one. Rinse and repeat. In Morrowind, when everything looked so weird and curious, I would deliberately walk all the way to my mission because I was sure to come across at least a dozen curiosities to explore and investigate on the way, and a dozen different weird types of creatures would come across my path. and the flora was just too interesting not to look at. I spent years on and off with Morrowind, and I guess I created around 20 to 30 characters in my time with it. Now that I've finished the main plot of Skyrim and a couple of other questlines, I find myself hard-pressed to find the motivation to enter the world again. It's a fantastic game, don't get me wrong, it's just too normal for me to care.